Everyone. My name is Hifza Khan and I'm a student of 4th year MBBS studying in PUMS Nawabshah. The topic that I've been assigned today to present is strabismus, which is otherwise popularly known as squint. So how do we actually define a strabismus or squint? A very simple definition states that a misalignment of the visual axis of the two eyes is what we call as squint or strabismus. Now I have kept here a diagram to make you all familiar with certain terminologies that I will be using quite frequently in this video. These include ESO, EXO, hyper and hypo. So ESO, wherever I'm going to use ESO, it would mean that it's a conversion type of squint, which means the eye would turn inward. And wherever I'd be using the term exo, it would mean that eye would turn outward, which is a diversion type of squint. And hyper, as we all know, is when the eye turns upward or is elevated, and hypo is when the eye turns downward. So we can broadly classify the strabismus into three different types: the apparent squint or the pseudostrabismus, the latent squint, which is also known as heterophoria, and a manifest squint. So latent, as we all know, is a hidden type of squint, and manifest is an obvious type of squint. A manifest squint is popularly known as heterotropia. So we have further two different types of manifest squint, which include the concomitant squint and incomitant squint. The concomitant squint is the one where the angle of squint remains the same in all the 9 gazes, and the incomitant squint is the one where angle of squint differs in one or more of the 9 gazes. So what are these 9 gazes of vision? These include the cardinal position or the primary gaze, where the eyes look straight ahead. Then there is elevation, depression, dextroversion, levoversion, dextroelevation, dextrodepression, and levoelevation and levodepression. So now comes the pseudostrabismus. A pseudostrabismus, or an apparent squint, as its name implies, that it's a false squint. It is actually not a squint, but it looks like a person has a squint. So it is a type of squint where the visual axes are in fact parallel, but the eyes seem to have squint. We can further divide the pseudostrabismus into pseudo-esotropia and pseudo-exotropia. So as the term ESO is used again, I would like to mention that it is an apparent convergent type of squint, which may be associated with a prominent epicanthal fold, which covers the normally visible nasal aspect of the globe and gives a false impression of esotropia. Whereas a pseudo-exotropia, or apparent divergent squint, is associated with hypertellurism. And hypertellurism is a condition where the distance between the two eyes is greater than normal. So this condition of pseudo-esotropia is very common in the infants, where the epicanthal fold is quite prominent and gives a false impression of esotropia. So now comes the heterophoria. Phoria, wherever is going to be used, it would imply that the squint is a latent or hidden type of squint. So heterophoria, which is also known as the latent strabismus, is a condition in which the tendency of the eyes to deviate is kept latent by fusion. So it is the fusion that makes the eye look like they don't have a squint, but they actually do have it. So therefore, when the influence of fusion is removed, the visual axis of one eye deviates away. And practically, the small amount of heterophoria is of universal occurrence. So it's not an abnormal condition if somebody has a very small amount of heterophoria, because it's of universal occurrence. Everybody, you and me, are going to have a certain degree of heterophoria. Now comes the type of heterophoria. There are four major types of heterophoria, which include esophoria, exophoria, hyperphoria, also hypophoria, but the fourth type is cyclophoria. Esophoria is a tendency to converge, as we have already discussed. Exophoria is a tendency to diverge. Hyperphoria is a tendency to deviate upwards, and hypophoria is a tendency to deviate downwards. Now, there is another important type of phoria, which is cyclophoria, which is a tendency to rotate around the anterior-posterior angle. So this further has two different types. The cyclophoria, in which the eyeball rotates nasally, is what we label as encyclophoria, and if there is a lateral or temporal rotation of the eyeball, we're going to label it as excyclophoria. So the etiological factors or the main culprits behind the latent squint, these include a number of conditions, one of which is orbital asymmetry. Another one includes abnormal interpupillary distance, faulty insertion of extraocular muscle, a mild degree of extraocular muscle weakness, anomalous central distribution of the tonic innervation of two eyes, anatomical variation in the position of macula in relation to the optical axis of the eye. Now, a point to be noted here is what is the impact of interpupillary distance on the type of squint. So, a wider interpupillary distance is what would result in a divergent type of squint or exophoria, and a smaller interpupillary distance is what is going to result in esophoria or a latent convergent squint. So now the symptoms. Now depending upon the symptoms, heterophoria can be divided into two types: compensated and decompensated. Compensated heterophoria is what is associated with no subjective symptoms. Apart from the latent squint that only a patient himself can observe, he presents with no other complaints. But what makes a patient present to an ophthalmologist is the decompensated type of heterophoria, where he has problems other than his squint. These problems include the problems due to muscular fatigue and due to failure of maintenance of a binocular single vision. So the symptoms because of muscular fatigue include headache, eye ache, difficulty in changing the focus, and photophobia, which is a sensitivity to light. And symptoms because of failure to maintain a binocular single vision include blurring of vision, intermittent diplopia, and intermittent squint. So how are we going to examine a case of heterophoria? There are a number of tests that we can perform to examine a case of heterophoria. The first one, and the one of utmost importance, is testing for vision and refractive error, which is done under full cycloplegia. It is the most important test because a refractive error may be responsible for the symptoms with which the patient presents, or it could be the only culprit for the deviation that the patient has. The next very important test is the cover uncover test. So this test tells us about the presence and the type of heterophoria, and to perform it, one eye is covered with an occluder and the other is made to fix on an object. So in the presence of heterophoria, the eye under cover will deviate, and after a few seconds what we do is that we uncover the covered eye quickly, and the movement of the eye under cover is observed. The direction of movement of the eyeball tells us about the type of heterophoria. So if the eye moves outward, it is going to be a case of esophoria, and if the eye moves inwards, it is going to be a case of exophoria. And also the speed of movement tells us about the recovery, whether the recovery is slow or rapid. Another test that we can perform is a prism cover test, and the next test of very prime importance is the Maddox rod test. The instrument that we use for this particular test is a Maddox tangent scale, which is kept at a distance of 6 meters, and it is placed in front of one eye with the axis of the rod parallel to the axis of deviation. So the principle on which this Maddox rod test works is that due to dissimilar images of the two eyes, the fusion is broken. And as soon as the fusion is broken, the previously latent squint now becomes a manifest squint and becomes quite obvious. So this is a Maddox wing, and the test that we're going to perform with this particular instrument is a Maddox wing test. A Maddox wing is actually an instrument by which the amount of phoria for near distance can be measured. Now with near distance here, I mean a distance at 33 centimeters. And this is again based on the same principle that the dissociation of fusion by dissimilar objects would make a latent squint become manifest. Now, how can we treat a case of heterophoria? So, treatment is only indicated in decompensated heterophoria where the patient presents with complaints other than the squint that he has observed. So, the first treatment option is that it is a mandatory step that we need to uh, correct the refractive error if it is detected during the examination of heterophoria. Another treatment option is orthoptic treatment, which is indicated in patients with heterophoria without refractive error, and in those where there is heterophoria and the other symptoms which are not corrected by the use of glasses. What the aim of orthoptic treatment is that it improves the convergence insufficiency and the fusional reserve. And the at, at your clinics, you can use a synaptophore to do some orthoptic exercises, and some simple exercises can also be taught to the patient so he can perform them easily at home. The third treatment option is prescription of prism in the glasses. This is done in certain selected cases of hyperphoria and in some troublesome cases of esophoria and exophoria that do not respond to the use of glasses or orthoptic exercises. So the prism is prescribed with its apex towards the direction of phoria to correct only half of the heterophoria, or 2/3, but not totally. It does not correct the heterophoria fully. And in the cases which are refractory to all of the mentioned treatment options, we go for a surgical treatment in which we strengthen a weak muscle, which could be a culprit for the squint, and otherwise we could weaken a stronger muscle, whichever is the etiological factor, we're gonna repair it. That is all for